GreedFall is a third-person action-adventure role-playing game made by the French developer Spiders and released by Focus Home Interactive in 2019 to reasonably positive reviews. Like many Focus titles, it's one of those increasingly rare mid-budget games, sitting between outright indie projects and massive 100-hour AAA behemoths littered with microtransactions and worker abuse scandals. But it's an ambitious project, clearly made with a lot of love, and plays in many ways like a sort of spiritual successor to an older generation of role-playing games, like a historical fantasy version of the original Mass Effect. It's also a game about colonialism. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that there are just some hints of a colonial theme here and there, the way there is in most fantasy. I mean that the game is directly, centrally about colonialism. The relationship between indigenous populations and settlers, its effects on nature and culture, and the scars that will never truly heal in its wake. And on the face of it, it is great to see a game in an industry notorious for downplaying the political dimensions of its works attempt to address such a sensitive and often tense facet of our history with such directness. But the result is a game that, while clearly well-intentioned, often completely fumbles the execution in a way that is incredibly frustrating and occasionally even a little offensive. I'm not interested in just shitting on a game that tried something ambitious and didn't completely stick the landing. There are things that do work about GreedFall's portrayal of colonialism, and there is some real creativity in the game's setting. Instead, I want to use this as a jumping off point to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the medium of video games in attempting to tackle this issue, and ultimately ask whether it's even possible to properly talk about colonialism using the role-playing game in its current format. But first, let's address the pasty elephant in the room. As is by now embarrassingly clear, I am a white Brit. My family background is Breton and Irish, so that means that some of my ancestry certainly were hurt by colonialism, but I personally have overwhelmingly benefited from it and will continue to do so for the rest of my life. I can't personally understand what it is to suffer under colonialism, and while I studied history throughout school and read a lot of books in my own time, my knowledge of colonial history is, let's say, incomplete. And by the way, can we talk about how history lessons in the UK jump from, like, Shakespeare to World War I and never bother to fill in the gap? We weren't hibernating for 300 years. It's almost like the British state wants us not to know about our history because then we'd realise that our entire country was founded on a legacy of cruelty and murder. I'm sure that's not it. Anyway, what I do know is mostly from books and discussions with friends from backgrounds in countries with experience of colonialism who were kind enough to enlighten a mortified idiot. So, in all likelihood, I will probably make mistakes in this video, but I welcome anyone who knows more than I do to correct me in the comments. With that out of the way, let's talk about a flawed game. So to start off, I'm going to do a quick synopsis of the game. You're in Tier 3D. It's a mysterious island populated by wild beasts, magic, and natives who aren't elves, but I definitely thought they were initially. Your country, which is called the Merchant Congregation, and two other empires have recently discovered this place and are carving it up between them. But in doing so, they brought home a terrible disease, the Malachor, which threatens to tear your homeland apart. You play as Desade. You're a diplomat, and your cousin, Constantine, is the son of the prince. He's always getting himself into trouble and has major daddy issues. Buddy. Me too. Constantine is going to Tier 3D, where he's going to be governor of a new city, and you're going with him as his advisor. You have two main jobs: manage relations between the settlers and the natives, and find a cure for the Malachor. While on your quest, you gather a crew of 5 companions, each representing a different faction, including Siora, native daughter of a tribe chief and loyal warrior, who comes to request help stopping a war between her tribe and one of the other empires. She and many other people you meet initially mistake you for a fellow native, but put a pin in that. You spend most of the game exploring the world, fighting mystical island creatures and enemy warriors, and completing quests for different factions and individuals. The quests can generally be solved by fighting your way through, sneaking around, or persuading people to do what you want. Typical to these kinds of RPGs, you can also romance certain companions, including same-sex options for both male and female characters, which is neat. Constantine becomes sick with the Malachor, and after attempting a ritual to heal him, he's kidnapped by the High King of the Natives, who disappeared a while back. Meanwhile, you discover that you were actually born a native, but that your mother died and that you were taken back to the merchant congregation to be raised as one of them. You hunt down and kill the High King of the Natives, who explains as he dies that he sees Constantine as a threat to the island. You need answers, and the only way to get them is to meet the very real god of the island, who lives in a volcano. You choose the new High King of the Natives, and we'll get to that. And then go chat with the god, who drops some major truth bombs as gods are wont to do. The Malachor isn't an illness, it's a poison that the settlers created by mistreating the island. He also tells you that Constantine's ritual worked and that he's going mad, drawing power from the island to the point where he will destroy everything on it. The god promises that it'll teach you how to heal the Malachor if you treat the island with more respect, but warns you that Constantine may be an obstacle in that goal. Then Constantine turns on his former allies, takes control of the island monsters, and goes to kill the god. You decide to intervene, and after a long final battle, you reach Constantine, who tells you that he wants to destroy the old world, become immortal, and rule over the island with you by his side. You choose to either kill Constantine or join him, and that's it. Right, so clearly there's a lot there. This is a completely new world with a million new words and names, but it's also deeply allegorical, which means that most groups have pretty direct real-world equivalents, and those which don't are tied enough to video game and fantasy tropes in general that it's all straightforward enough in the moment. It's also helpful that the broad message of the game is actually incredibly simple. Basically just that diverse groups can and should cooperate to make the world a better place. But, as with many allegories, such direct comparisons can create some unfortunate implications. At this point, it's worth mentioning that every creative lead and writer of the game that I could find online has been white. Hey, just wanted to make a quick note here. In the next section, I talk a bunch about the visual representation of the native islanders, but one group I just don't mention are the sailor faction, called the Nauts. While I've been editing the video, I came across this essay by YouTuber Conquest of Dread, which discusses from a Maori perspective the ways in which the Nauts visually appropriate and misinterpret that culture, and the glorification of colonialism. It's a really powerful piece, and I've included a link in the description, which I highly recommend you watch, not least because his perspective in this instance is far more valuable than mine. Let's talk about the natives. According to this article, Spider's co-founder and CEO Jehan Rousseau explains that their culture and aesthetic were primarily based on Gaelic and Celtic tribes, which I think partly explains why, when playing the game, it's easy to conflate them with elves in the Tolkien tradition, as he drew extensively from that same history in his own work. Their language, Iatfredi, also features extensively. It's apparently a mixture of Flemish, Breton, Gaelic and Irish, and is usually untranslated, though you can often pick up through recognition and context what words mean. There's been some genuinely amazing detective work by players such as Reddit user u/channels, who's posted an extensive guide to the language. The thing is though, those probably aren't the first indigenous groups that most players will likely consider to be represented by the islanders. My initial read was that, above anything else, the native islanders were a clumsy stand-in for Native Americans, with their spiritualism and connection to nature, tribal communities, and face paint. And that's not just because of American dominance in cultural shorthand and video games in particular, nor is it entirely my own ignorance of the real cultures Spiders drew from. My grandma's native language is Breton. I made that connection primarily because of the context of the rest of the game's world. The European tribes Rousseau mentioned were largely destroyed, weakened, or assimilated into other cultures more than 1,000 years ago, even if aspects of those cultures remain. But the aesthetic of the rest of the game, with its tricorn hats, merchant guilds, and pistols, generally evoke the mid to late 1700s. So in the prologue of the game, which takes place in your home country, when people talk about sailing to the New World, you're immediately invited to think primarily of the colonization of the Americas, especially when your faction, the Merchant Congregation, and rival empires Ptolemy and the Bridge Alliance also evoke specific empires from that period. My best guesses being the French Empire, Spanish Empire, and Ottoman Empire respectively. So as a result, the specific and detailed work spiders did to respectfully present their invented race is undermined because it exists outside of the time invoked by every other aspect of the setting. So it ends up looking and feeling kind of lazy and condescending. It feels like a bunch of stereotypes plastered in from the wrong time period. There's also another strange tension that comes from what is otherwise a progressive choice. You see, because the natives are their own invented race, racial divisions as they exist in our own world are meaningless in the world of GreedFall. So Spiders made the pretty cool choice of portraying the three empires and the natives as racially integrated, with a multitude of skin tones shown across all major populations. Except, this really backfires when you get black characters from one of the empires oppressing white natives on the basis of their race. All of the most powerful people in the Merchant Congregation, apart from Constantine, are black. And Siora, your primary connection to the natives, is white. So the attempt at inclusivity, given the history the rest of the game alludes to, backfires. Because we, as players, have internalized racial divisions as they exist in our own world. So in the end, these two characters don't come across to us as being different races. These two characters do. And so, colonialism in GreedFall doesn't come across as the inherently racist endeavour that it is in reality. And then there's the accents.
I am Ulan, chief of the village of Vignamri.
What about you, Afra? Did you find the answers you were looking for?
Oh.
I don't understand how things work here.
Okay. Let's look at this properly for a second. The main thing that I notice after I've cringed myself into oblivion is that as baffling as the accent is, it is consistent. There are precise sounds on certain syllables that happen across performances. Though they vary in quality, they're all performing the same thing. The oi sound sounds to me like a stereotypical, exaggerated Irish accent, whereas the rolling R's suggest maybe an Eastern European voicing, or maybe Romani. Considering what Rousseau said about his influences, these choices make some sense, even if the combination of influences sounds kind of forced and unnatural. But again, because everything about the story and setting seems to be suggesting that we think of Native American tribes, the accent choice is even stranger. And because it's so grating, the effect is a totally othering experience. The natives sound weird, primitive, maybe even a little stupid, and it's just not fun to have a prolonged conversation with them. It got to the point where by the end I was skipping through their dialogue because I was just so sick of the accent. To be clear, this isn't so much an actor problem as it is a problem of voice direction. But the effect is that any attempt at seeing them as real people who are equally human and capable as our protagonist is hindered. All of this is purely a matter of depiction, which would be true no matter what the medium that GreedFall was in. I'm sure we've all seen respectful depictions of Native Americans and other Aboriginal groups in films, TV, books, even music that fall into exactly the same traps that GreedFall does. But GreedFall is a game, which means that not only are you witnessing this clumsy depiction, but you're interacting with it. GreedFall's gameplay is fairly unremarkable for an RPG of its style, but by deploying conventions of the genre into this context, you end up with some really weird situations. Let's start simple. Combat. Like in most RPGs, combat is a regular occurrence in GreedFall. As you travel through the wilderness, you'll be attacked by bandits, enemy soldiers, and most often, the wildlife. These are big, scary, aggressive monsters, and you will have killed a lot of them by the end of the game. And on the face of it, so what? Every game expects you to kill a monster or 100, what's the big deal? Well, with the historical set dressing, there's a different context. When you kill a dragon in Skyrim, you're the hero of a fantasy story. You did a good thing. When you kill one of these bastards in GreedFall, you're doing it as a settler in a land where you don't belong, killing the wildlife and disrupting the ecosystem. There are even some bigger, more involved boss-style fights, which are a fun gameplay moment, but they're also basically a trophy hunt. People like you are the reason the dodo went extinct and the buffalo came close. Defenders of the game might object to me referring to Desade, the player character, as a settler. Your secret mum was a native, and everyone keeps saying you look like one, so you've got as much right to be here as anyone else, right? Oh, I don't buy it. Functionally, you were raised in the culture of the settlers, believing yourself to be one. You're a high-ranking member of one of these occupying forces with your primary allegiance to your country. You do interact with the natives, but it's as an outsider, maybe learning a little about the culture and history, but never fully assimilating into one group. In real life, these factors wouldn't diminish someone's ethnicity. But in GreedFall, there aren't any visual characteristics that make the natives natives, so we can only go on culture and accent. In all meaningful ways, this is a white saviour story. Yes, even if you make your character black. It's sort of like an inverse Last of the Mohicans, where in that story, Hawkeye is a white hero raised among natives, you are a native raised among settlers. But in both cases, these are stories which presume you will identify more with the protagonist's whiteness or settlerness than with their nativeness. And boy, are you a video gamey white saviour. There are countless problems in Tier 3D, and not a single one will get solved until you take time out of your busy schedule to deal with it. A sailor's gone missing? Go look for him. No one else will. There's a snake oil salesman in town? Sure, you're qualified to figure out if his miracle cure works. Uh-oh, this hunter's having trouble with the job he's been doing his whole life. Well, you're just the novice to help. It's a totally normal part of the RPG formula. But there are a few situations, like with the hunter, where there's a sense of like, damn, these natives are useless. Thank fuck you showed up when you did. There's no way they can take care of themselves. And I don't think I need to explain why that might be a problem. One side quest early in the game comes to mind. This fella over here is trying to sell his pelts in your capital, New Serene, but the mercenary guard / police keep confiscating his wares. You go ask the mercenary quartermaster why it's happening, and he says you need a patent. So you go see the guy in charge of patents, but he says it'll take months to get one ready. So you have a charisma check to speed things along, but if you fail, you have to go ask your old teacher to write you a letter of recommendation, which you bring back to the patent guy to approve the process, and then you finally bring the patent over to the merchant, but he tells you that his cousin got arrested by the mercenary guard for bringing more pelts to the merchant because they lost their patience waiting for a patent, and now your cousin's been sent to the arena to fight to the death, so you have to go fight by his side and save him. In theory, I actually really like this quest. Having to go back and forth and jump through all these bureaucratic hoops just to get a sales permit really hammers home the sense of how hostile settlers are in ways that go beyond physical violence, using arbitrary forms and rules to impose themselves. But then we get to the arena bit and it's like, really? Combat is the way we're going to resolve this issue? The thing is, GreedFall isn't built for puzzling. It's completely focused on combat and conversation as the two primary mechanics through which you interact with the world. So in order to justify this quest's existence, it throws in a fight at the end. But the story and meaning of the quest is about the violence imposed by bureaucracy. So to my mind, it would be more fitting if the gameplay was focused on that. Maybe the conversations are a little more difficult to succeed in. Maybe they require selecting specific answers from a wider variety of options, some of which will fail. Or maybe you need to work out which form is correct based on clues and context. I'm not asking for papers, please here. It doesn't need to be that involved. But in GreedFall, finding important documents is never more complicated than walking up to the glowing orange thing and pressing A. And many of its quests are equally as arbitrary as this one. A slightly more involved and innovative bit of gameplay would communicate the really interesting idea underpinning this quest much more effectively. Many quests discuss atrocities carried out in secret against the natives. In one, a rogue scientist is experimenting on them to find a cure for the Malachor. In another, a businessman has enslaved a group of islanders, and there's a lot of talk of forced religious conversion. All of these things are treated with the right severity, but miss the mark in a couple of ways. Firstly, almost everyone you meet with any authority is either already not racist, or can be convinced into sympathising with the natives. This is likely because, as a player, you don't want to feel like you're helping the bad guys. You kill a lot of bad apples in this game.
For his crimes against the natives, he's banished from this island.
Asili's madness was exposed to the entire world, and you have demonstrated the horror of his methods.
But the integrity of the bunch is never in question, when in reality, colonial atrocities are usually carried out with the full knowledge and support of the empires committing them. The other thing is that while this is a game about long-lasting consequences and the sins of our parents, many of its own conflicts are very neatly wrapped up moment to moment. What's going to happen to these natives who are held against their will or experimented on? How will that affect their mental health, or their sense of personhood, or their ability to trust others? Not really your problem. You saved them. They're fine.
You were free, and know that we are sorry for what happened to you.
We must believe that not all again blow or alike.
None of that's really remarkable for most video games. NPCs often are one-dimensional. They don't generally have rich inner lives or feelings. They're just there to be helped and to make you feel important. But when you're referencing the real-life historical practices that inspired these quests, you can't just leave it at, they're free now, you're a hero for saving them. The only way to stop a bad colonist with a gun is a good colonist with a gun. By following a convention of video games, by treating its side characters the way that most games do, it undermines the central theme of GreedFall, that the effects of colonialism are felt long after the atrocities are committed or stopped. And then there's a moment I really lost my patience with GreedFall. After killing the High King, which everyone gets over super quickly, weird but fine, whatever, an election is scheduled. The next High King will be one of 3 tribe leaders. Deirdre hates the settlers and wants them out. Ulan wants to integrate with the settlers, and Dunkas sits between the two and is generally portrayed as the wisest and most peaceful. You need permission from the High King to go see the god, so you ask them if they'll help you out should they win the election. If you helped them earlier in the game they will, but either way they want your help getting elected. There's a crown hidden in a cave that's super important to the natives. If someone wore it to the election, they'd immediately win. So you go to the cave and find the crown, where you meet Deirdre, who had the same idea. You can either let her leave with the crown, or fight her for it, and then give it to whichever of the 3 candidates you like most. In most video games, choices like these are great. In Skyrim, the Nords are the Empire. In Far Cry 4, Amita are Sabal. Fallout New Vegas, the NCR, Caesar's Legion, Mr. House, or Vegas itself. These choices give you a sense of affecting huge change over the world, while also giving you a chance to consider your values and political stances, and that's clearly what GreedFall is going for here. But already, GreedFall shoots itself in the foot by demonstrating a clear preference for one choice over the others. Dunkas is chill. Everyone says how wise he is. He's not a warmonger, but he won't sell his people out. But in previous quests, both Ulan and Deirdre mislead or betray you, and their stances are portrayed as extreme. The game likes Dunkas best, and that influences the player more heavily than the flawed opposing ideologies from the other games mentioned. But the biggest issue with this quest, though, comes yet again from the context of the game world. By choosing a king, you've just imposed a puppet dictator on a people you've colonized based entirely on your own whims. Siora even says so before you go find the crown.
Are you certain you are willing to influence the fate of all my people to meet en on Milfrichtman? I understand that you might find this idea unpleasant, but the survival of the whole continent relies on this encounter, Siora. It is my feeling that you do not understand the consequences of such a decision.
I'd already convinced all 3 possible leaders to help me out, so there was no reason for me to interfere. But no, you have to go find the crown or the story won't progress. Okay, not great, but maybe if you go find the crown and then don't give it to anyone, you're not imposing yourself. No, you have to choose. Your only out is to stand aside when Deirdre comes to get the crown. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like you're abstaining. You're choosing Deirdre, who is introduced in a quest where her village does a creepy blood ritual and who will almost certainly start a war. So here you are, an outsider, choosing the king based on either your own interests or what you assume are the interests of the natives but can't know for sure. It's something empires have done throughout history and continue to do now, albeit in subtler and more underhanded ways. And the game is aware of the implications because Siora says so, but it makes you do it anyway. I guess because that's what games do. You're the protagonist. You need to feel important. This is an important thing you can do. Whatever you choose, there are no consequences beyond a little post-game slide. The game never questions your decision, and you move on. And this, to me, is GreedFall's biggest misstep in how it portrays colonialism. It applies a video game trope, mostly uncritically, adds in a bunch of detailed allegorical set dressing, and then just undermines its own message. There's so much more I could talk about if there was time. I haven't even mentioned how GreedFall has a Jesus stand-in that came to the island ages ago and then made friends with the island god, but you're just going to have to take my word that that's a thing. And to reiterate, I don't have anything against Spiders as a developer. They have a lot of talent, creativity and passion, and I'm excited to see what they make next. The point is, though, I think GreedFall is really instructive in the tensions that come with discussing systemic issues in an RPG. It's a fun, combat-heavy power fantasy in an exotic foreign land where you make world-shaping decisions. But it's all of those things while trying to criticize a phenomenon that disempowers and inflicts violence upon exoticized people. Some issues could have been helped. For example, if instead of a settler with native heritage, you played someone born and raised among the natives, that could have deepened the player's emotional attachment to them. But ultimately, it's not just a story or the clumsy portrayals
I don't understand.
that blunt GreedFall's critique of colonialism. It's the form of the media itself. These fun RPG conventions are just at odds with the ideas underlying the game. Ironically, these game conventions are about ownership, conquest, and individualism, so they are themselves manifestations of colonial culture. And you can't criticize colonialism by encouraging all of the things colonialism does. Which isn't even to say that RPGs will always fail at these critiques, just that their conventions need to be rethought. Disco Elysium delivers incredibly sharp critique of capitalism, systemic racism, and powerlessness, while still being an enjoyable, often hilarious game. And it does so by, among other things, removing combat as a casual element and ensuring that the many choices you make are small, personal, meaningful without giving the sense that you're changing the world all by yourself. I want to leave you with this. GreedFall's good intentions and fumbled execution are neatly summed up by the Malachor itself. The Malachor is a great device from a plot perspective. It's mysterious and deadly, giving the story momentum and your character a clear purpose to cure it. It helps to drive Constantine's madness and gives characters a justification, in their eyes, for their terrible treatment of the natives. And then there's the metaphorical level, in which it's a physical manifestation of the land taking revenge on the colonists who presumed ownership over it, carving it up and killing and enslaving its various populations. A just punishment for those cruel and arrogant enough to claim land as their own. But the thing is, there was no Malachor or anything like it when Europeans colonized the Americas, Africa, South Asia, and Oceania. The Europeans didn't get sick. They brought sickness with them. Smallpox wiped out countless people, and settlers slaughtered and drove away the rest. The lasting scars of colonialism aren't felt on the colonists or their descendants, but on the people subjected to it. Ultimately, if we're going to continue telling stories about colonialism, I think I'd rather hear those people tell them. Thanks for watching, folks. I know this is a bit of a heavy first video for a channel to put out, but when I was playing through GreedFall, I just had so many thoughts, and this is a as good a place as any, really, to explore them. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, all the YouTubey things. I'm hoping to release new videos every month. The next few are going to be about video games, but over time I want this channel to be able to talk about all sorts, from TV and movies, even music sometimes. And yeah, just generally, thanks again for watching, and have a lovely day.